It's a bloody miracle in a society where even people like you still pigeonhole people exclusively by race. It is a miracle.
Let me ask you. Let me ask you that.
I'm finishing my thing. You don't interrupt me. It is a miracle that a party that is absolutely committed to non-racialism and inclusion and economic-based empowerment, that is the second biggest party and about to take over the cities.
Helen Zille, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's nice to be on your program, Jan.
What a fantastic honor it is for me. I just said so. We met literally 3 minutes ago, and I confessed to you that I'm quite a fan. So I'm really very happy and very privileged, and I really appreciate the fact that you take off a Sunday afternoon to spend some time with me here back in Holland. Let's start with the fun stuff. I came across a headline the other day, which I thought was quite rather nice. It said, Helen Zille, the bluebird of happiness. And I like that because it is the kind of the happy warrior that one sees in the headline. So I guess my very first question to you would be, are you a happy warrior? And have you always been a happy warrior? Because I noted here for myself that your political career really started 58 years ago when you were
years ago, amazingly enough. But yes, look, I love politics because I believe politics is essential to getting South Africa to succeed. It's the foundation. And I'm always very happy when I'm doing politics, yes.
You started, I mean, I made a reference now to you as a schoolgirl. I think the Progressive Party had the Young Progressives or something
youth.
like that.
That's right.
That's right. I mean, would it be fair to say that that's where it all started for you?
Well, I came from a very political family, and my parents had joined the Progressive Party very early. And I was always interested in listening to what they had to say around the dinner party. So as soon as I could, I joined the Progressive Party youth and got involved there, and it all went from there. That's the story.
You mentioned your parents now, so I want to talk about, I have in my mind the idea of this young girl, 18, 19 years old, when you started your career in politics. Here you are many, many years later. I'm trying to see if there's a line to be drawn from the young girl to the Helen of today, whether the forces that motivated you are more or less the same. And you mentioned your parents now, the role that they played. If you can elaborate.
I've always been very interested in politics, and my parents fostered that interest. And I was always very aware of current affairs. I read newspapers from a very young age. I was always interested in what was going on. And that was a good start for me. And then I thought, well, South Africa is not going to succeed unless we get the politics right. And I was very keen to play a role in getting South Africa to succeed. So I thought the political path was the one for me.
I noted here both your parents come from, I would use the word fled Nazi Germany. So that has a particular character, and I can imagine will lead into a great deal of the consciousness with which you were brought up. Can you tell me a little bit about that? And the point I want to get to is, did your parents use the Holocaust story to understand or help you understand the South African story?
Well, to answer the first question, yes, my parents were refugees, and they came to South Africa. If it wasn't for South Africa, they would not have survived. So they were very grateful to South Africa, and indeed so was I. But they did not like the politics of South Africa. And the thing to do when you don't like the politics of a place and you've got an opportunity to get involved, you get involved. And that's what they did. And that I got the bug from them, actually. And I'm very grateful to them for all the contributions they made. I grew up very poor. If you look in my book and the pictures in my book, you will see that our house was mostly made out of corrugated iron. It had some solid walls, but mostly not.
Really?
Yeah. And but my father built it as he went along. without any luxury of any architectural guidance. So it was a very interesting kind of house.
Yeah.
But we didn't know anything different, so we were happy as anything. And then slowly we moved into the middle class as my dad's business succeeded. And then we went from there. So yes, my parents did shape my consciousness, but they never compared what was happening in South Africa to the Holocaust.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
anyone who does
Well,
doesn't.
I didn't suggest that either, Helen.
Yeah.
Let me just refine that question a little bit. Is draw from, I think, is a better description, their experience. They fled Nazi Germany. I'm not trying to say that apartheid was like Nazi Germany or the Holocaust. I'm not silly enough to make that kind of comparison. But that they draw from that experience, their consciousness about relationships between groups and peoples, or whatever the case might be, to educate, inform, help shape your ideas and political consciousness.
Yes, no doubt. I mean, my parents didn't like nationalism. They felt that nationalism was an ideology that drove people into opposing camps that could often lead to war, and they'd seen that often enough in Europe. So they didn't like nationalism, and they were both staunch liberals, and they believed in individual identity as the core value of society, and they promoted that idea. So yes, I think that did come from the consciousness of what a rampant nationalism could do in Germany.
I want to get to two points here. You mentioned your parents became engaged politically. Are you talking about parents, or is it your mother getting engaged, or both father
Both
and
my
mother getting
parents.
engaged?
Both my
And
parents.
what does that mean in real terms?
Well, my mother, they both joined the Progressive Party very early.
Mm.
And my mother joined the Black Sash as soon as it was a viable entity. And I remember my dad telling me that he was in the South African Legion, and he was a strong supporter of Sailor Malan back in the day.
Let's go to you went to university at Witwatersrand University.
I was
That's
first
correct.
at
You studied.
UCT, and then I came back to Wits, yes.
Where in your life, in your youth, did the word apartheid begin to take shape and form and meaning for you?
Very,
When did
very
it
early.
start?
Very early. I mean, in primary school.
Mm.
In
What did
primary
it
school.
mean?
Well, my mother used to get very upset on things that were shaping our consciousness in the way of Christian national education. And so she always used to try and give the opposite perspective. And the most telling memory I have was when I came home one day and said we'd had a piece of cheese and a glass of milk because the school was introducing a feeding scheme.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother was incensed, and she said they're not feeding black kids so that they can feed white kids, and white kids don't need the nourishment as much as black kids do. And I mean, I'd get that all the time, from my mother on 1,000 issues.
Yeah.
And I remember, I mean, every time I taste that particular kind of cheddar cheese, I think of my mother saying that to this day.
And when you started your young career from university, you joined the newspapers at some point. You became a journalist. This is where you and I have something in common. You worked under Alistair Sparks, if I have it right, for the Round
And
Daily Mail.
Raymond Lowe and Rex Gibson.
I met Alistair Sparks here in Amsterdam, had lunch with him, and after lunch he offered me a contract to work as a stringer, as a foreign correspondent for the SABC during his early SABC years. So we've got that in common with each other. Your story is far more dramatic, though. I nearly said I had nearly formulated in my head you had an encounter of Steve Biko, meaning actually you had an encounter of the Steve Biko story. Tell me about that.
Yes, I mean, you remember that in September 1977, Steve was murdered in detention. And Jimmy Kruger came out with a story about the hunger strike, which we knew was a lie. And Alistair sent me off to try and get to the truth. And he worked on the story with me. And Jonathan Gluckman actually gave us the critical break we needed. Jonathan Gluckman was the pathologist for the Biko family. And he told us categorically that Biko had died of brain damage, not of a hunger strike. And then we had to find a way of breaking that story without compromising Dr. Gluckman, which we then did.
Yeah. Tell me about your motivation for becoming joining the Ron Daily Mail and journalism. Was that something specifically because of a particular political interest? That you have it from a very young stage in your development, your life, the idea that one day I will get involved in politics? And why would that be? What would drive you? What would be the thing that would want you to become a politician or a journalist for that matter?
Well, I loved current affairs. That was always my favorite thing at school. Debating and current affairs were my favorite aspects of my school career. And especially going to school in the morning, we had quite a long drive, and my father always used to buy the Rand Daily Mail as soon as he could on that drive. And then he used to say, "Tell me what's going on in the world." And he would let me summarize the major issues for him. And I became kind of obsessed. I'd wait every day for that stop with the newspapers and then have to read and summarize the news for him. And I loved doing that. It was like following a serial every day. So that's when I started reading Alistair Sparks's columns and when I started getting to know these things better. So yes, I mean, and then I thought, well, I want to be a journalist. I mean, I'd always volunteered for the progs in all the elections and stuff. But back then, there wasn't even a viable concept of becoming a public representative for a political party because we only had one in the whole country. And, it's a point that I made at the launch of our candidates last Friday, the 14th, when we launched these candidates and all the DA candidates for Joburg could not fit on the stage. They could not fit on the stage. And I said to everybody, I remember the days when we had one single public representative in the whole of South Africa. And now the candidates for Joburg can't fit on the stage. And it was a very happy memory to see how far we've come.
Right, let's just talk for one moment before we go to Hillbrow. I want to go to Hillbrow as soon as possible. I just want to tell you this. I recently asked a young black videographer to do a Zoom with me from Johannesburg so that I can have a look at what Johannesburg looks like today. And I had the fortune as a young student to having lived in an apartment building called Lorna Court, which you will probably be familiar with. It is
I know all of the courts in Hillbrow. They're fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, most.
Well, I lived in Lorna Court, moved to I think Aston Court, and moved in Jeppe Street. I'm not sure what Jeppe Street is called today.
Now, Jeppe Street is not quite in Hillbrow, but yeah, I know what you're talking about. Okay.
Johannesburg City Centre, Jeppe Street. I've got 2 or 3 streets up the road from the Carlton Centre, where I lived as a 19-year-old, 20-year-old young man.
That's very cool, yeah.
And it is a fascinating experience. He took me back to Lorna Court and showed me the devastation of Johannesburg. So I want to get to that. And the question in my mind is, I guess, when was the last time that you sat in a car or walked through the streets of Johannesburg, or experienced Hillbrow and Johannesburg? When was the last time you did that?
I've done it quite a lot in this campaign. I've done it quite a lot in this campaign. I went back to all my old haunts and I've walked down many of the streets. Lillian Goy Street, which used to be Bree Street, was the street that blew up, for example, and I've been up and down that street. I've been down Main Street, I've been down Commissioner Street, I've been down Moy Street. I've been back to the flats. My flat was corner Mitchell and York Street in Berea.
Yeah.
I used to know Rocky Street very well in Yeovil. I used to go there a lot. I've been there.
Pizza?
Huh? Yeah.
Mama's Pizza?
Mama's Pizza. And also Troyville. I've been to Troyville, the eastern end of Joburg, quite a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm there all the time.
Yep. And so you obviously, I wouldn't say you're aware of, you obviously know about it, you live it, you smell it, you see it. The question that goes through my mind, and I'd like to hear your voice on this, is what happened in Johannesburg CBD? How did that all happen in such a short period of time? How is that possible?
Well, the middle class moved out and the buildings were occupied and the owners of the buildings lost complete control of them because many were hijacked and tenants didn't pay, and when they were hijacked, they were extorted for money from the hijackers. And then the blocks of flats started owing the city millions and millions in terms of unpaid rates and service charges. And then the services were stopped, and then the owners of the buildings abandoned them. And you know how it goes. You know how
Yeah.
urban decay goes, and that's a classic model of it.
I mean, you agree with me that it is quite astounding. If you
It is
if
quite,
you
it
if
is
you like me,
completely
you've lived in Europe for some time, and you go back to South Africa, or at least as I had this video glimpse that I had of it some 4, 5, 6 weeks ago, I could not believe what I saw in front of my eyes. It was just, and the question in my mind is just, how did we allow that to happen? How did the authorities allow that to happen? Wasn't there some way of managing the city in some way that one could? It just seems virtually a fantastical improbability that a city can decay to such an extent.
It can, because the ANC was in charge. You know, that's the inevitable outcome. They
Mhm.
will destroy anything and make it bankrupt and whatever it is. I mean, you know, we've got Sea Point in Cape Town. Now, Sea Point under the ANC was rapidly on its way to becoming another Hillbrow. Fortunately, we won an election in time to prevent that, and Sea Point had as their councillor a young chap called J.P. Smith, who fought day and night to prevent buildings being hijacked, to close down the brothels, to close down the gambling dens, to close down the drug dens. And he turned it around. I mean, properties in Sea Point were spiraling downwards, and now they're some of the most expensive real estate in South Africa.
On the 25th of September, I noted here, the DA announced your candidacy. It's been 330 days. And for me here in Amsterdam, it's been many days of fantastic little video clips that I saw of you and doing all sorts of crazy stuff in Johannesburg. But my question now is, um, how does the process work? Did the DA nominate you? Did they nudge you onto taking on this position, or
No.
did you nudge them onto nominating you? How did that work? Why was it decided that you, ex-Cape Town mayor, could save Johannesburg?
Well, the way it works in the DA is this: the DA calls for nominations or
Mhm.
applications. So you can put in your own application and say, I'd like to apply for the position of the DA's candidate for mayor of Johannesburg. And you put in an application, and then all the applications are first sieved to ensure that the final shortlist comprises people who would be able to do a creditable job if they
Mhm.
got the position. And then it's very tough. You know, they give you a subject, you have to prepare a major presentation on it. You have to then give that presentation and be grilled on that presentation by the entire panel. You then have to make a speech. You have to answer a whole series of questions on a number of topics. And then your track record is taken into account, and they add up all the points, and then they determine who's going to be the candidate.
Yeah. So it's nothing like I thought in my mind. You get together at a dinner party with John Steenhuisen and some other top figures of the DA, and you kind of discuss this and talk about it and think, well, hey, would that not be a great idea if Helen would do that? That's very
No, no.
naively, but
When,
how I
when,
saw.
when I saw the ad, I applied.
Uh-huh. Okay. Why, after having such a successful run as a Cape Town mayor, why at this point in your life undertake such a massive, huge new challenge?
Well, you see, I knew that I was going to be stepping down from being chair of the Federal Council.
Mhm.
I'd done that for 2 or 3 terms. I can't exactly remember. I'd been elected in that position 3 times. And I thought to myself, I can't do it again. There are many good, competent young people who are coming up to do the job. And I was going to phase out completely. And then I thought, no, what am I going to do when I'm sitting there retired and with a million things I would like to contribute? So then I thought to myself, what would I really like to do? And then I thought, I'd really like to see if I can help rescue Joburg. Because I knew very well that South Africa can't succeed unless Joburg succeeds. I mean, Joburg is home to 70% of company head offices in South Africa. It produces 16% of GDP. It has 6 million people. South Africa can't succeed if Joburg fails. And Joburg is really not at the brink of failure. It's gone over the edge, and we've got to pull it back up. And I thought, if I really want South Africa to work, which I do, it's been my lifelong driving force. And if I really want my children and grandchildren to be able to stay there, and my grandchildren's children, then we've got to do something about Joburg and Tshwane and Ekurhuleni and all the major metros. And then I thought, well, there's a candidate for Joburg. It didn't look at that stage as if we were going to possibly win Joburg. But I thought to myself, let me just throw my name in the hat and see what happens, and see if I can't work hard enough to increase the number of votes we get in Joburg. So that's how I did it. That's how I went into it. I've got a big project still left inside me. And I don't want to be sitting chomping at the bit and getting frustrated from the sidelines.
I'm a year or so younger than what you are. And I just can't help but asking that question, because I have to confess to you that sometimes I go to the shop and I go back and I live in an apartment and I go up the stairs, and kind of halfway up the stairs, I kind of think I'm a little bit tired and I need to sit down. So I was just wondering, how do you do that, and why would you want to do that?
Well, I do want to do it because I would hate to sit around and be bored. I mean, I would read, but you can't read all day. And I'd go for walks, but you can't do that all day. And I'd do a gardening, but I've got a tiny little garden, so that wouldn't be okay. I want to do something that gives my life purpose and meaning, because that's the only way I stay happy. And, I've got a lot of stamina and energy. Fortunately, my brain is very much together. Fortunately, I don't tire. I can keep going on and on and on and on. I got a bit of muscle pain, I have to confess, after all the dancing we did on Friday at the launch of our candidates. That was such a happy party that I could feel it in my thigh muscles on Saturday and last night as well. But I'm fine now. I took a few anti-inflammatories and I'm fine. But, I love it. I just love getting engaged. And, I've been working very hard on understanding what the crisis is in Joburg, and on a ready-to-govern program, so that if we get in, we will be able to hit the ground running. So we've got all of those things lined up, and it just gives me complete invigoration. It floats my boat, as the saying goes.
Yeah, I have to ask you, you're married to a chap called Johan. It's got my name. You're married to an Afrikaner. That was a bit of a surprise to me. So I guess you're kind of half Afrikaans. I'm an Afrikaner. So just wondering about him. I mean, he must be your age, roughly, as well.
He's 83. He's older than me.
Well, so he's older than you. Was there not a moment that he sort of sat down in the lounge and just said to you, Helen, should we, could we, can we, is this a good idea?
Well, he's learned better than to try and stop me from doing something that I've set my heart on. And I think he quite likes it. He's got this famous phrase, I married you for better or for worse, but not for lunch. He doesn't want to see me in the day because I've got too much energy, and he said, out, go do somewhere else, So I start redoing the house and painting this and extending this wall. And he knows if I'm busy enough, I won't disturb his peace. So he likes his peace. Look, he said to me, I'm not coming to Joburg with you for the campaign. I'm hoping that if we win, I will persuade him to come to Joburg. But at the moment, he said he wants to stay in the little place that we've built up together in a small retirement village in Cape Town. Very happy there, doing his thing. Our sons are there, our grandchildren are there. And he says, I'm not going, but I'm hoping to change his mind if we win.
Yeah. The polls seem to look very good for you at this moment. I've seen some of the polls coming in. Is it a shoe-in? Is it a done deal, do you think?
No. You must never, ever think that anything's a shoe-in in politics. Never ever think that anything's
Mhm.
assumed in politics, because, a poll is just a snapshot in time. It'll tell you where we are today, but it won't tell you where we will be next week or the week thereafter. And so many things can happen. We have got about 82 days left till the election. And 82 days, a long time in politics. A lot can happen that changes that outlook. And you must remember that the ANC hasn't started campaigning yet. It's quite extraordinary. I've never known the ANC to be this late out of the blocks. The ANC is always out of the blocks later than we are. But this late, that's never happened.
Yeah, yeah.
And they can't settle on a mayoral candidate. And I think they're at war about local candidates, and it continues.
You are, according to artificial intelligence, I checked on Grok and I tried ChatGPT and all these different AI sites, but you are I think, the second most popular political figure in South Africa.
That's nice to know.
That's what I got in some of the information, the research that I've done.
So
So
Ramaphosa is the first. Yeah.
Ramaphosa gets 47% of the vote. You get 29% of the vote. I think that's pretty good. I'm not sure if that's disappointing to you. But I notice here on your heels is Julius Malema with 28% of the vote and Jacob Zuma with 27% of the vote. So I just was wondering, how do you feel being part of that little gang?
Well, I'm not part of that little gang in the sense that people obviously had to vote for each candidate. I'm not sure
Yeah,
how they got to that figure. But you must remember that that's not only urban areas. If you did urban areas, the numbers would look very, very
yeah,
different.
yeah.
That includes rural KwaZulu-Natal. It includes rural Limpopo, Mpumalanga, Free State, the Northern Cape, the Eastern Cape, Wada Wada. It includes all those rural areas. And, I'm glad that we could break through to the point that in an overwhelmingly black country, a white politician can be so high up. And that shows that we're improving as a society. It's proving that more and more people are being judged on the content of their character and not the color of their skin.
Yeah.
And that is the step we have to take if we want to succeed in the society.
Yeah. Let me ask you a very silly question. Something that popped into my mind that I said to somebody else the other day is, I was wondering why Helen Zille decided now to run for the mayorship of Johannesburg if the DA is indeed doing quite well. I see it sort of creeping up, and at the same time, we have to now accept that the African National Congress has just really tumbled down, destroyed itself. And then naively, I would say, well, if I was Zille, I would wait till 2029 and become the candidate for the presidency. I mean it sincerely.
Oh, that's very sweet of you. But we always put forward our party leader as the candidate for the presidency.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that is the right thing to do. But
Yeah.
also, I think, what can I contribute now that will make the biggest difference? And I left Parliament to run as the mayoral candidate in Cape Town because I always knew we had to fix the cities before we could fix South Africa.
Yeah.
That is where the economy is. That is where the people are. We have to fix the cities. And that's what I've always wanted to do. I wouldn't mind being deputy president, but I don't think that I'd like to be the president.
It is a politically very, if you do well in Johannesburg, I could imagine that the DA will do extremely well during the next elections.
Well, that's the point.
And there's a correlation.
That's the whole point. I mean, if we win in this election, Joburg, Tshwane, and Ekurhuleni, then we will win Gauteng in 2029. I am pretty sure we will win the Western Cape again. And I am pretty sure we will stay in government in KwaZulu-Natal. That means we will be effectively running 3 provinces, one in coalition, obviously. But it makes a big difference when you're running the economy of South Africa, both at a local level and at a provincial level. It makes an enormous difference. And then the rest will follow like dominoes.
You think the time has come, 2029? that the ANC I saw a podcaster making a reference to the party of Kenneth Kaunda in Zambia, who just after a period of 30 years or whatever the case might be, but somewhere around where the ANC is right now, they just simply disappeared. And I think they have now got one single little seat in parliament or something like that.
Correct.
Do you
The
think
same
that's
with the
the...
party of Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana,
Yeah,
just the same. Look, I think 30 years is about the limit for these liberation parties.
yeah.
And I think it's the same syndrome in South Africa. But the critical thing is what replaces them. Will it be better? And it's nothing short of a miracle that it's us. And I think that there is a real chance that we could be the biggest party in South Africa in 2029.
Incredible.
Make some noise for Joburg! Yeah!
It's been 330 days so far, 80 days to go in this campaigning of yours. You've done some really crazy stuff. Will you tell me some of the stuff that you really thought was, well, that's kind of risky and dangerous, but I'm going to do it anyway? Yeah, tell me about some of the crazy stuff. And I would imagine, how would I think you have grandkids, how would the grandkids react to grandma doing this really weird stuff?
They have a good laugh, they have a good laugh. I'm a risk taker. It's inherent in my nature. I take risks and I take big risks. I always have. And I suppose that helps in politics. You can't always take the safe option. You have to stand up and you have to fight, even where the odds are against you. And you have to do crazy things. Now, in this era of social media, it's very short attention spans and no one's interested in politics.
Yeah.
And you have to do things to say, hello, this is an important election and please focus. And we envisioned through lots of chats inside the campaign team and very, very much with a young and innovative social media team, we envisaged and planned all these things. And I love doing them all, including abseiling down a building.
Yeah, I saw the images, and also going on what do you call it? One of these removal trucks, and swimming with your goggles on in some pothole in Joburg. What was the craziest you've done so far?
Sure, it depends. What was the craziest I've done so far? Remember to register and vote yay!
Yeah, have you got any more crazy stunts planned for the next couple of weeks upcoming? And how does it work? Is it a bunch of young people around you that come up with all these ideas and say, well, let's give it...
We spark with each other. We spark with each other. I mean, the time that I swam in the pothole, a lady phoned me and said, there's this huge pothole in Douglasdale and it's growing so big I can't drive out of my driveway anymore and this and that. So I said, okay, I'll come and see it. So we went past and she met us there. And I said, my goodness, this one's big enough to swim in. She says, well, why don't you? I've got a wetsuit. So I said, sure. So then I went and put on her wetsuit. The trouble was it was a wetsuit for a petite lady, not me. and I had to force it onto myself. I'm sure her wetsuit has never recovered. But nevertheless, I went in with her goggles and her snorkel and her wetsuit.
Absolutely insane. And do you get a telephone call from your husband saying, I've just seen some images or stories going around the newspapers about some stuff that you're doing, and that he's kind of saying, Helen, Helen, Helen?
No, he laughs. He laughs. He knows better than to try and stop me from doing something.
Yeah. I want to talk to you a little bit about, because I sit here in Europe and I kind of have a view from abroad about things happening and developing in South Africa. And because of my close association and work for the SABC in South Africa during the transition years, and because I'm an Afrikaner, I have a very close, not fondness would be a silly word to say, a very powerful bond with South Africa. So I believe it or not, go through a lot of the heartache here, 12,000 kilometers away from South Africa, about what is happening to my country. Where is my, do I still have a country? Is there, in fact, I sat a couple of days ago, I sat in the park talking to an elderly lady, and we were talking about where I'm from, and I told her about the question that's always in my mind is, do I still have a country? Is South Africa still my country? All of those kind of feelings I think people experience in South Africa, I experience it here as well. So questions of that hat on my head about looking at South Africa from far away. One of the most important questions to me would be, have we established in South Africa 30 years post-apartheid, a South Africa, a national identity, something that we can call our home, our space? Is there something like a national identity that we can all feel ourselves comfortable within?
Well, it's moving very nicely in the right direction. You know, against every odd imaginable, South Africa is moving to become a stable, plural democracy. It's got a way to go, but we're moving in the right direction. And we're able to deal with plurality much better than Europe can, for example. And, you know, it's time for you all to come back, guys. I mean, you know, who wants to live in Holland that is now hotter than South Africa in summer and ice cold in winter? We don't have those kinds of crazy extremes. So come home. We've got lekker people. It's bloody lekker here. It's cool, man.
Yeah, but you just said some. Yeah, you just said something that I have to react to now. You talk about you're on the road to create this, I think you used the word plural democracy. But every single discussion that I've been having the last year or so on my podcast with a host of South Africans from all sorts of political spectrums. I even had Andile Masitami, I think is his name, on my podcast. So I talk to people on the extreme right, the extreme left, the middle. I'm the little guy in the canoe in the river and see the peaks on both sides and try to explore that and try to make sense of what is going on in South Africa. So now you say to me, we are on the road of creating this successful plural democracy, whilst everything I've been told up till now, up to the point that I'm talking to the future mayor of Johannesburg, you're saying exactly the opposite of what I've heard for the last year. I see bubbles, people living in bubbles. I see a divided society. I hear calls about Cape Exit, and I listen to folks like Ernst Roots and Lex Libertas and these people who are talking about self-determination, homeland, etc., etc. I've even heard the terminology, what is the right word, balkanization of South Africa. You're saying exactly the opposite. Where's the truth is my question.
Well, we should be a federal state, and we must move towards greater federalism. There's no doubt about that. But that isn't balkanization, not at all. But we should move towards greater federalism, and that is the DA's policy. But if South Africa wasn't moving in that direction, the DA wouldn't be able to win an election. I mean, Cape Exit is such a marginal fringe group that I think they only win one seat in the Cape Town City Council and in no other council. And they make a lot of noise, but hardly anybody in the Western Cape wants to exit South Africa. So when you listen to them, well, you know, it's useful to hear their perspective, obviously, but they've got no political clout or force of any kind. And their entire argument was the DA can never win Joburg and can never win Tshwane and can never win outside the Western Cape. So we want to exit South Africa because there's no chance that the DA can win elsewhere. And I said, watch us. We will win elsewhere. And, you know, I'm going to chat to them after this election, if we do manage to govern those three cities, and ask a little question about their predictions. It is absolutely fine for Afrikaans-speaking people as well to say, we want to preserve our mother tongue at tertiary level, and we won't ask the state to do so. We will raise money, and we will build a tertiary university that teaches through the medium of Afrikaans for anyone who wants to be taught through the medium of Afrikaans. Nothing wrong with that. It's all part of a free and open society. There is absolutely nothing wrong with people arguing for greater federalism, for greater decentralization of power. And if people, want to call that self-determination, that's fine. And we're trying to drive that in our local authorities. For example, in Cape Town, we have these things called sub-councils, which are smaller councils at a lower level than the main council, precisely because people in specific areas want to be able to have more say in governing themselves. That's federalism. That's not a disaster. It's not a crisis. It's all part. I mean, the more Afrikaans-speaking people think that they can preserve their culture, their language, their education, and their history in a common society, they will be more prepared to be part of a common society.
Are you saying to me that I talk, and I've talked to the wrong people the last year? People that tell me that there is this desire for more self-government or some form of self-government. I spoke to Corneille Mulder about a month ago, and he assured me, he said to me, well, he said 235 is back for discussion again. I just read an article now a couple of days ago that Lex Libertas, that's Aaron Ritz's group of people, have just received a donation of something like $1 million from some American government institution to back them in their research around the topic of self-determination for the Afrikaner. So my question just is, how much of this and how much of that am I to believe about the South African situation? Are we a happy, multicultural society with a couple of headaches that need to be sorted out? Or do we really have a systemic problem that the idea of the multicultural, multiracial democracy is not workable for a country like South Africa with its massive land mass and its diverse groups of people?
Well, if Corneille believes that his position is a position whose time has come, then he must get a few more votes, hey?
I get it. I know 70% of Afrikaners vote for the DA, I think, if I'm right.
I mean, just look at the scoreboard, my friend.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
But a plural democracy must make provision for the people who think like Corneille Mulder.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which is the two families, the Mulders and the Groenewalds. They change leader by going down to the next generation.
But is there from your, and I'm asking you this because you're married to an Afrikaans guy, name of Johan, surname Maria.
Johannes Gerhardus Bester Maria, to be exact.
Right. So I can imagine that you have a lot of discussions and sit-downs with his family as well, that you are culturally pretty well embedded within the Afrikaans society as well. What is the kind of talk that you hear? Happy, satisfied South Africans who say, yep, we are very happy in this rainbow nation, all is well, except for a couple of hiccups with potholes and problems with governance, etc., etc. But for the rest, we're one happy people.
People are not happy, but they see the DA as a solution, which is what I'm saying takes us in the correct direction.
Mm-hmm.
They see the DA as the solution in the main. And so do more and more Black people, and so do more and more colored people. And that's the good news.
Let me ask you this question. Since Donald Trump made his announcement about the special executive order for the Afrikaners, that opened up the whole sort of debate and discussion in South Africa. And I've been following that discussion, and I've spoken to, as I said, to people on a broad spectrum. And I found it to this point, I find it quite impossible to figure out where are we now in terms of the success of building this unitary state, this nation, this one South Africa, this happy rainbow land, and to what extent is the whole thing kind of collapsing and falling to pieces. And when I have interviews with the likes of the Kali Creoles and the Solidarity people and the AfriForum people, and that's quite a substantial chunk of Afrikaners that they represent, I hear an entirely different story about the hopes for the future of South Africa. So help me out.
Yeah, well, I'll help you out with the greatest of pleasure. Look, we don't believe in a unitary state. We believe in a federal state. That's the first issue. The second issue is we think that the state should get out of people's way if they are trying to preserve their culture and language and way of life. and that there's nothing wrong with doing so in a plural society as long as you don't discriminate on the basis of race. So, for example, if academia is starting an Afrikaans-speaking university, they're very welcome to do that. But then they mustn't say only white Afrikaners are allowed to come. It's got to be all people who want higher education through the medium of Afrikaans. And I know they have no problem with that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing wrong with that. If Zulu speakers were to do that, I would applaud and back them. The truth is that in a free and open society, individuals are allowed to determine their identity and build institutions and organizations that advance that and serve their group as long as it does not unlawfully discriminate on the basis of race and gender and various other things. But people are allowed to preserve their culture. And in fact, in one way, the very fact that this should be encouraged in South Africa enables the success of a federal state. Enables it. It doesn't militate against it. And I find it very interesting that Afrikaners are not queuing up to go to the United States.
Mm-hmm.
They'd much rather stay here. Now, if they wanted to, they could all be queuing around the block at the American embassy, but they're not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They're not. And the reason that they're not is that they think they've got a future here. Even, and maybe because AfriForum is being so effective here.
So I'm trying to find where's the balance here.
Giving you the balance.
All right. Okay. I'm with you. I hear exactly, as I said, directly the opposite of that from many voices as well. And I'm trying to figure out for myself exactly
I have a
where.
high regard for AfriForum. I know that many people, think that there's people like Adrian Basson and Max Dupree trying to prove that they're the voice of the devil. I don't think so. I see them as an Afrikaans cultural organization that loves the language, that loves the culture, that wishes to preserve it, and that's doing its thing on their own private money to achieve that. And if Zulu speakers, and if Xhosa speakers, and if Sotho and Tswana speakers were doing the same thing, I would say hallelujah. Because that helps a plural society live as a federal state.
What do you say to people that, and that's once again from the conservative side, that say, tell me that the Democratic Alliance is ANC light, and what distinguishes yourself as a party from the African National Congress? I'm just talking about the policy. I'm not talking about the corruption of the party. I'm not talking about the incompetence of people. I'm talking about just policy platform. What distinguishes you? What makes you different?
The policy leads to the corruption.
Mm-hmm.
Cadre deployment and the ANC's form of empowerment has always been designed to enrich the ANC-connected elite with its expression as cadre deployment. The corruption flows from the policy.
Yeah.
So we've got a fundamentally different policy. We believe in constitutionalism and the rule of law. We believe that when you sign a document, you stick to it. We believe that in education, for example, students are more important than unionized teachers. I mean, on just about everything, we differ from the ANC. They've got some rhetoric. We've got a fundamental policy platform rooted in principle. We're liberal, they democratic centralism. I mean, there's nothing where we overlap. The only reason that we're in the coalition government at national level is because the alternative would be much worse. The alternative would be the ANC, the EFF, and MK. I mean, people love to throw these little labels around when they haven't got a clue.
Let's talk about Black economic empowerment, for example. What in practical terms would the DA do, or what is different on your policy from that which the ANC, what the ANC is doing?
Well, we believe that empowerment needs to target the people who are marginalized and still suffering the effects of oppression over the decades.
That's 99% Black people in South Africa.
Yeah. But it's not the upper elite and the ANC cadres becoming more than billionaires.
That's the corruption. That's the corruption I'm talking about. That's not the policy I'm talking about.
That was the policy. And that was the intention. And as Jacob Zuma says to me, I did nothing wrong. I just did BEE. And he's quite right. That's the ANC's BEE. State capture, the whole lot. It flows from it. Our policy is to grow the economy, to get people into jobs, and to ensure they have education and skills that will get them into jobs, because getting a job is the most empowering component of empowerment you will ever see. And the ANC's version is to enrich themselves. Two totally different approaches.
And my question to that is that the corruption of BEE, or is
No,
that
it's always the intention. You must understand that all the rhetoric means nothing. The way it has been encapsulated in policy from the beginning, and the emphasis on ownership and the elite that has been gotten into ownership, and the nomination by the ANC of those ownership components, 100% policy, not the corruption of it. They intended that from the beginning. It's not an aberration.
I wrote down here, isn't BEE in part a product of the Codesa settlement?
That policy was only imposed when the ANC was in government.
But the point is that policy is imposed with the idea of actually giving back to those who were in the dark corners of the days of apartheid.
If you believe
that's the principle I'm talking about. I'm really talking about, are you criticizing the principle or the execution of? The execution seems to me, that's the impression that I have.
You're completely wrong.
Execution is,
I'm not saying
well, help me out.
Let me just tell you for the last time. The principle of the ANC from the start was self-enrichment. And they gave it a nice moral-sounding fig leaf. And every time we pointed that out, they would defend it as being BEE. If you see how all these deals were done, how they were put together with the ANC cadres, how all those ownership deals went to the connected elite, especially in mining and in various other places, that was not a slip of the tongue. That was the fulfillment of the principle of the policy.
The fundamental question is really, at the end of the day, is do we, and then I'm going to put it in very blatant terms, as white South Africans, 30 years post-apartheid, do we have some form of a moral obligation towards our history, towards the black people of South Africa, and does that moral obligation express itself in policies like black economic empowerment? And I'm not talking about the corruption or the abuse or the misuse of the concept, the idea of black economic empowerment. I'm trying to find out, where does the DA stand within that context?
We don't define these things on a racial basis. We define it on a needs basis, and on a marginalization basis, and on an access basis. You're still working on imposing on me the identity that I'm a white South African.
Mm-hmm.
That's the least important part of my identity. My identity are the values and the principles and the character and the perseverance and all the other qualities that are far more important to me than my melanin count. And there are lots of black and brown South Africans who are in the DA precisely because they don't believe that their race is the most important part of their identity. Now, having said that, we believe that marginalized and poor people should be included in the economy, and should be included in such a way that they can improve their circumstances. And the best way to do that is to ensure that education improves, and then that the economy grows quickly enough to enable people to get jobs and to get a foothold on the ladder of their economy. That is proper empowerment. And so where the DA governs, jobs grow twice as fast, at least, than the ANC. Just look at the difference in jobs growth in Cape Town and in Joburg, for a start. There is just no comparison. And when the DA governs, more people get jobs. Why? Because we govern so that people have confidence in the future. We get services working. We try and improve access. People get jobs because more investors invest and grow the economy. That's empowerment from the bottom up.
I want to react to, you said, and correct me if I heard you wrong, you said your white skin it does not say anything about your identity, or it has nothing to do with your,
It's the
I
least
guess,
important component
the
of my
least
identity.
important part. The opposite view of that is, and I've spoken to a lot of experts in this area as well, would say, well, if you ask that same question to a black person, exactly the opposite would be true to that black person, because just about every single thing about him will be, and no, it's history.
That is the most racist
No, that's
thing.
history. No,
You go
that's
ask
history.
any black person in the DA whether they think that. You can't generalize like that.
Well, you're referring to black people in the DA. I'm talking to black people in the black experience in general terms. And what I, as a journalist, when I talk to black people, say, tell me about your experience, they would say to me,
you can't generalize about any group of people.
No, absolutely. But what I'm saying, Helen, is that if you ask that question to any black person who lives in America, for that matter, he will say to, and she will say to you, that my entire being, my entire identity is defined exactly by my black skin, exactly because of the history. And my question is this, a very simple one. You have, within my understanding of it is that within the Democratic Alliance, you have some form of what one would call then black economic empowerment, but it will be based on empowering those that are the poor, that are the lesser well-off in society. It makes perfect sense, except that in terms of the demographics, it will mean that the end result will go to anyway 99% of black people. So my question, though, is about the principle. Do we have, after 30 years of apartheid in South Africa, an obligation to rectify our history, or have we drawn a line and we said, you know what, those were days gone by, we have no such obligation today anymore? That's the fundamental question.
Ask that question. I mean, obviously we have to.
Mm-hmm.
But those are two totally different issues that you're dealing with there. You're crossing paths like this all the time. Let me tell you that black people join the DA because they don't want to be seen as a color of their skin first. They join us because they agree with our principles and policies and vision for the country. They agree with our political philosophy, which is non-racialism. They want to be part of a meritocracy. And we currently have, and you should have looked at my latest posts, you can see the candidates for Joburg. They're a complete reflection of South African society. And they were all chosen on merit, not because of the color of their skin. That's a principle for the DA selecting candidates. Now, you go and look at that. Don't tell them that they were elected because they were black or because there was an affirmative action. They are there because they want to associate with the DA because of our principles, and they want to be chosen on merit, which they were. And that is why we succeed in government and the ANC doesn't.
Do you believe that we have that moral obligation to observe the mistakes of the past, and that there must be corrective measures still taken in South Africa to undo those measures?
The answer is yes, but don't measure parties by an intention. Measure them by
measuring a party. I'm not measuring parties, Helen. I'm talking about human beings, black human beings and white human beings, and their views of South Africa and what is morally acceptable and morally not acceptable. And my fundamental question, I go back to the same old question over and over again to everybody that I talk to, is: are you talking about the fundamental principles of black economic empowerment, even if you call it something else, or are you talking about if you discredit it, are you discrediting it based on the corruption of these concepts, these ideas that we have seen in South Africa?
Obviously, we have a moral obligation to deal with the legacy of the past.
And how would that express itself?
The way the DA is doing it, getting people into jobs, getting people out of poverty. Look at Cape Town and the Western Cape. The Western Cape has 19.5% unemployment, dramatically fallen. Gauteng has 35.6% unemployment, even though they're the economic capital of South Africa. That's the first thing. In Cape Town, people are getting into jobs. They're being taken out of poverty. And Cape Town versus Joburg, Cape Town has halved absolute poverty since we took power there in 2006. Mm-hmm. And in Joburg, it's continuing to increase. What is more empowering? Look at the right numbers. Look at the right statistics. And then you'll know who's doing empowerment. It's the DA.
You said that the battle, I saw this in one of your clips the other day, the battle is not between the DA and the African National Congress. The true battle is between the DA and the EFF. In other words, it's an ideological battle.
Yes, of course it is.
Explain to me.
There are people in South Africa who believe in constitutionalism and the rule of law, in non-racialism, in a market-based economy. That's the DA. There are people in South Africa who believe that the leader should control the party should control the state, and the state should control the society and the economy. That's the EFF. Those are two polar opposites in the approach to resolving South Africa's crisis. MK is firmly in the corner of the EFF. That's what they believe. They've had 5 changes of leadership at least, and they haven't once held a Congress.
Yeah.
That's what they believe. The ANC doesn't know what it believes. Half of the ANC is with the EFF, and about 15% is on our corner of the spectrum, and the rest don't know where the hell they are. They follow power. So those are the two ideological counterpoints. And everything in between is crumbling and having to choose a side.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's what it is. The EFF may only be polling at 9% at the moment, but they represent an ideological poll in crisp terms. And it's a damn miracle in our society that that hasn't become the dominant poll. And there's only one foreign observer who has ever understood the real dynamics, and that is Henry Kissinger. When he came to South Africa in 2010, he came to see me because he's a big football fan, so he came to watch the 2010 World Cup, and he came to see me. I was Premier of the Western Cape, and I was leader of the DA. And he said to me, you know, people say the DA can't make it and the DA can't do well. He said, the miracle is that it is doing as well as it is. And he said that he told Richard Nixon always that it's impossible in Africa to get the growth of any political party based on principles and policies that cut across tribal lines. He said it's impossible. He said the DA was proving him wrong, and he wanted me to know why.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He wanted to say why. He wanted me to tell him why. And then we had a long and very interesting discussion. He got it. It's a bloody miracle in a society where even people like you still pigeonhole people exclusively by race. It is a miracle.
Let me ask you that.
I'm finishing my thing. You don't interrupt me. It is a miracle that a party that is absolutely committed to non-racialism and inclusion and economic-based empowerment, that is the second biggest party and about to take over the cities. It's a miracle.
You just kind of, I think the word used is pigeonhole. You use the word in reference to my questions that I'm asking you. I want to put the following to you. My view of these things is that the two fundamental problems the biggest problems that I think South Africa faces, that's my observation from here, is on the one hand, colossal, massive poverty. That's a huge problem in South Africa.
Yes,
the other problem is a colossal, massive corruption. Those are the two fundamental problems I think that we need to tackle in South Africa. Hence my question. The question that I have now is, when you talk about these AfriForum and Solidarity talk about race laws, these 135 or whatever race-based laws, do you describe those affirmative action laws, or whatever you want to call them, black economic empowerment laws, do you describe them as racially discriminating laws, or do you describe them as laws conscious of race and history, and therefore it came into existence? I think you know what I'm trying to say.
Well, not all those laws can be compared with each other. They're different in different contexts for different purposes. Mm-hmm. But I think that no state, and this is my belief, no state has the right to classify its citizens and treat them differently on the basis of their race, as a principle.
How do you undo then problems in the past if you don't use race as a criteria?
Do you want me to start again? Johan, let me start again. I'll do it slowly.
Please do. Obviously, I don't have the clarity of it that you have, Helen. Please bear with me.
Let me do this and explain to you as follows. You're right about the two major problems in South Africa. One is mass poverty, which is the biggest risk. And the other one, which exacerbates that problem, is the extent of endemic and systemic corruption.
Yeah.
The places where we're getting people into jobs and stopping corruption is where the DA governs. So the places where we are solving South Africa's most endemic problems are through the DA. And we are doing that by seeing empowerment as a function of economic inclusion and advancement and training, not as a function of elite manipulation and enrichment.
With you 100%.
That's the difference. And so those are two totally different approaches. And if we believe that no state has the right to classify its citizens according to race and treat them differently on that basis, because that was apartheid, then we can go from there.
Yeah. Well, then what can the Democratic Alliance, what would a Democratic Government Alliance government do differently from the ANC to produce growth in South Africa? On the one hand, acknowledge the realities of the social fabric of South Africa.
We do that. That we do more than anybody else.
Yeah. Now, what are the three most concrete economic reforms that you believe can take South Africa the right way?
The three most concrete economic reforms are to make it easier to create a job and get a job. Those are the fundamental principles. Now, where the ANC
I know you get angry when I interrupt. Just explain that to me.
Right. Joburg is losing jobs hand over fist.
Mm.
Businesses are moving out of Joburg. Employment is dropping drastically. The reason is because there's no water.
Mm-hmm.
There's no electricity. You can't drive on the roads anymore. Sewage flows down streets and comes up through people's kitchen sinks because the sewers are collapsing. So businesses and anybody with a choice, or capital or skills, they go somewhere else, mainly to Midvaal, which therefore has a lowering unemployment and greater investment, where it's easier to get a job and to create a job. And the first is a function of the second. When it's easier to create a job, it's easier to get a job. So, in Cape Town, which has had massive urbanization, we had 11 million tourists over this tourist season. Now, tourists don't come to a place where you can't flush your toilet, can't get clean water out of a tap, and can't switch on a light, and can't drive anywhere. But we had 11 million tourists, and every 50 tourists creates one permanent job. That's why unemployment is falling. And because of agriculture. Agriculture is pumping out the jobs in the Western Cape. Because we do what we do, and we do it well, and we do it non-racially, and we do it to improve the lives of the poorest and most marginal in society, which is precisely the result.
Mm-hmm.
That's why unemployment is falling with the DA governs. That's why people are getting onto the economic ladder and going up the economic ladder. That's why people have better education and access.
Yeah, I kind of get a picture in my head of a scale of things at the end of the day. My question, I guess, would be, I spoke to Rob Hershoff not too long ago, and he was one of the people that many people who have told me in the last couple of months that all we need to do in South Africa, and that seems to be what politicians are hitting on all the time, is we just need to unleash the power of the free market. I guess my question is, does the Democratic Alliance keep some space in that space for government?
Of course. I mean, you cannot have a functional democracy without a free market economy, in our view. But even though China shows that you can have a capitalist economy without democracy, we can't because we chose democracy first. And therefore, we need a market economy to ensure that our democracy works. And I don't think that you can totally unleash the power of the free market. I mean, you've got to have a role for the state, and you've got to have state regulation, for example, in key areas. And let me give you an example. It was the regulation of our banking sector, which was rational and fair and right, that prevented South Africa feeling as much of the impact of the crash of 2008 as the rest of the world did. So there is a space for state regulation, but not to the point that it drives away investment and growth. You have to, for example, prevent monopolies growing in an economy. You have to.
Let me share some information that somebody sent to me the other day about the question about, it's like this elastic band, the free market, and what I would call, I live in Holland, forgive me, a more social heart is kind of what we think about. I pay my taxes here, but on the other hand, I must say that the state, in lots and lots of ways, is a kind of a protector of me as well. So I pay my taxes with a fair sense of happiness and generosity to the state, because I know that when I find myself in dark times, I have a reliable state that can take care of me if need be. So I want to read something that I wrote down here that I got from somebody else about the question about that elastic band, how much interference or how little interference. And I'm trying to find out from you, my question would be, where do you place the Democratic Alliance on that scale, and where is it different from what the ANC is currently doing, bar all the corruption and mismanagement and all the rest of the nasty stuff? Bear with me. Tonight, as you and I are sitting talking here, there will be 14 million South Africans who will go to bed without enough food in their stomachs. They will go to bed hungry. 60% of people, that's a figure that comes from the International Bank, World Bank, and I think from IMF. About 14 million South Africans go to bed with insufficient food in their bodies. I don't have a qualification for what insufficient exactly means. 60%, also according to the World Bank, of our people live in poverty or just on the extreme poverty line. More than 60% of our black youth can't find jobs in South Africa. To fix that, we would need a 6 to 8% economic growth every year for at least 20 to 30 years, year on year. That is something that no country has ever achieved without massive state control, state intervention. I'm not pleading for state intervention. I'm trying to figure out where on the scale is the DA sitting in terms of when we intervene and when we don't intervene. No country in the world has achieved that, including countries like South Korea. I noted here under Park Chung-hee in the 1960s and 70s. So the last words on this little statement that I got is that under the current path in South Africa, at least with the current situation, it is simply a pipe dream that we could change that situation in South Africa. No country has ever sustained 6 to 8% average annual GDP growth for 10 to 20 years without heavy government intervention. The standout examples like South Korea, Singapore, China all relied on strong state direction, industrial policy, and significant government interference. My question to the DA then is, okay, qualify, and if you can, quantify that interference as is on your policy platform.
Let me simply say that economic growth is a non-negotiable if you want to move people out of poverty. But in the situation we find ourselves in South Africa, we also need social grants to give at least some form of safety net. Now, and that's a form of state intervention. Social grants are a form of state intervention.
Yeah.
You've just alluded to it in Holland.
Yeah.
The trouble is that in South Africa, we have 7 million provisional taxpayers, and we have 29 million grant recipients.
Yeah.
That ratio is unsustainable.
Yep.
So the only thing we have to do is grow the economy. Now, the first time I read about a developmental state was when I read about Japan. And Japan got it right. They said we have to employ the brightest and the best and the smartest and the most devoted and committed in the civil service to ensure that the state facilitates in every way possible investment and economic growth.
Makes great sense.
Lee Kuan Yew did the same in Singapore. And I've got into big trouble in the past for drawing on Lee Kuan Yew. But I do want to say this, that unlike the ANC, state control there looks for the brightest, the best, the most competent, the most corruption-free. That is a developmental state, not a state that seeks to control everything at all, but a state that facilitates creating the conditions for investment and growth. And that's the kind of state intervention you need. The ANC's version of state intervention is control, and control by the incompetent and the corrupt. And that way we'll always go backwards. So if we want to know what a developmental state is, you look at the Japan model. You look at the South Korea model. You look at the Singapore model. And you say the role of the state to deal with unemployment is to have completely corruption-free, meritocratic civil servants that understand that their key role is to facilitate a private sector investment in growth and jobs. That's what it is.
You can see the sunshine coming in here in Holland, I guess.
Well, it's absolutely dark in
office.
South Africa now. I've got one little light on here, but it's pitch black and I'm sitting in the light and people can see me from the street, but it doesn't matter.
What I'm trying to find the whole time is just the balance in all of this. You alluded to 29 million people that are living on social grants in South Africa. And I know it's not sustainable, and I accept that it is not sustainable. The question, however, is what do you do with them?
You grow the economy and you get more people into jobs. That's what you do.
And that realistically goes back to what I just read you, this whole piece about no state has ever grown 8%, et cetera, et cetera. So
what we're not going to grow 8%. At least we mustn't grow 0.1%.
But can we grow 5%, 6%? Can we
grow 3-4%, and that would be a good start.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're not going to let the very best stand in the way of progress.
Yeah.
You know, if we grew 3 to 4% for 20 years, which is easily doable.
Yeah.
It would change the process completely. Then we could afford the social grants, and at a much higher level.
Yeah. I'm with you. It's a hell of a difficult struggle. I'm just saying that you're also, in what you just said right now, you are also giving people like Julius Malema the kind of oxygen that they shouldn't get. Well, because you basically are saying we have to accept the fact that it is not realistic to be able to grow 5, 6, 7%. The growth that is needed is unattainable, unachievable for at least the next 20 years. So I'm saying to 80%, I think Dr. Piet Krokom said that to me not too long ago, for the next 45 years, those young men and women that are matriculating this year will for the rest of their lives never be able to be formally employed. So you're saying we have to accept that, because basically it condemns a huge proportion of the country that will have to accept poverty is just unfortunately the way forward. You'll never see another world.
Let me just say this.
I'm just being very honest about you. I'm just saying that's
what you can be as honest as you like, but I'm as realistic as I can be.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if it's possible to make progress, even though
absolutely,
you make progress. And if you can do it at 3 to 4% rather than 6 to 8%, that is better than 0.5%.
Mm-hmm. But you accept that the World Bank finger. What you say? Well, I'm just saying we have to also be honest with people out there. What's the realistic prognosis for the next 10 or 20 or 30 years in South Africa?
It depends.
We have to understand that as well.
It depends who the government is.
Mm-hmm.
If people vote for the DA, we'll get growth at 3 to 4%, even more. You watch, if the DA wins, Joburg, Tshwane, and Ekurhuleni, do you know how much value it will unlock in those economies? You have no idea.
I hope I'm with you. Let's move to Johannesburg, and we have to round off this discussion.
No, man, we've got to go now. It's 1.5 hours, man. This is enough.
Have we been 1.5 hours? Been
1.5 hours.
Well, that's a sign of how much I enjoyed it then. All right, then just the most important thing you're going to do for Johannesburg. Just tell me that quickly, and then we'll end the program here.
Okay. Most important thing I will do for Joburg is restore basic services and end corruption over 5 years.
Short and sweet. Helen, thank you very much for your time. It's been a great pleasure and a great honor. I would dare to say I'd love to come back and invite you back, but I'm not so sure if you want to be invited back in the future. Be it as it may.
I get frustrated when
I do get that. I do get that. I wrote you a little, what we call an uitsmijter for you. Thank you so much for your fight. Thank you so much for your life's work and for everything you're doing and will do for Johannesburg. I have no say in this matter, Helen Zille, but just as Saint Genevieve stood firm when panic gripped Paris and saved the city from Attila the Hun through courage and faith, I believe you will save Johannesburg from the ruins and restore it to greatness. Thank you very much indeed.
I'll do my best, Johan. Are you going to edit this, or are you going to put the whole thing out?
I'm usually quite brutal on myself. So if I do, I'm going to use.
Well, you send me an edited version because I know what editing can do, and then I don't want another.
No. Well, then you don't. No, I don't. I don't edit. I prefer not to edit. But if you say, hey, you know what, then I'm always open to say, okay.
If you don't edit, that's fine. If you
no,
don't
I don't
edit,
really edit. No.
When people cut out critical bits about what I'm saying, and then there's a contextual problem and all of that, then I get a bit.
Yeah. No, I like honest and robust discussions, and I'm a devil's advocate. If you say yes, I say no.
I hear that. Yeah.
That's the way I do it, and that's the way I get the best reactions out of people. So, from my side, all I can say is thank you very much. It will go out as is, and I believe you will be our next mayor. And I think you're a fantastic choice. And if I could vote, I would vote for you, despite what you might think.
But aren't you a South African citizen?
I'm a South African citizen, yes.
Can
I vote in the local elections?
You can fly back and vote.
I'm a poor old man. No, I won't be able to do that, but I'll vote in my heart for you because I really, truly love what you're doing, and I love your spirit and your energy and everything about you. So don't get me wrong. I'm on your side.
Great. Thanks. No, I don't get you wrong. Thanks very much, Johan.
Okay. Have a wonderful day.
Now you know my husband doesn't want me in the house.
Have a wonderful day and much success with the rest of this campaign. And
so
I want to just ask you this. Do me one favor when you become mayor. Please put your signature to support to save some of those glorious Art Deco buildings in Johannesburg.
100%.
Save them for us.
We will definitely do that. The architecture is very important for me.
Yeah.
Very.
Thank you very much. Thank you for
a lot,
lovely chat. All the very best to you.
It was lovely. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.